Alina stood by the grand window of her marble-floored living room, gently cradling her 7-month baby bump. The soft sunlight poured in through sheer drapes, illuminating the elegant chandelier above her and casting a golden glow across the plush furniture. To anyone looking in from the outside, this was the life of a dreamer, picture-perfect fairy tale, captured in real time, and for the longest time, Alina had believed it too. At 28, Alina had the kind of soft grace that made people feel instantly at ease. Raised in a humble but loving household in Lahore, she was taught the value of kindness, dignity, and resilience. Her parents had worked hard to provide her with a good education, and Alina had never taken it for granted. She graduated with honors in interior design and carried herself with humility, even after her life took an extraordinary turn. That turn had a name: Raza Khan. Raza was a self-made millionaire, a sharp-minded businessman with the kind of charm that filled a room before he even spoke. They had met at a business event where Alina had been invited to present a student project. Raza had approached her afterward, intrigued not just by her ideas, but by the quiet confidence in her voice. What followed was a whirlwind romance. Private dinners, flowers delivered to her office, surprise getaways, and finally, a lavish wedding held at a 5-star resort by the sea. Now, 2 years later, Alina lived in a sprawling mansion in this elite sector. Their home was straight out of a lifestyle magazine's smart lighting. Infinity pool, curated art on the walls, and a luxury car collection that neighbors often admired from afar. Their social media was filled with images of their travels: Paris in spring, Istanbul in autumn, Dubai over long weekends. Raza's growing business empire, which spanned tech investments and real estate ventures, kept them in the news often, and Alina, though shy about the limelight, became a favorite among lifestyle bloggers. She spent her days designing the baby's nursery, attending prenatal yoga classes, and sharing morning tea with Raza when he was home. He always made sure she had everything she needed: prenatal vitamins lined up, her favorite fruits stocked in the fridge, and designer maternity dresses sent from abroad. Her friends would often sigh with envy and say, "You're living the dream, Alina." And Alina smiled, because she believed she was. She would run her hand across her belly and whisper sweet nothings to her unborn child, imagining a future filled with lullabies, bedtime stories, and tiny footsteps echoing through the halls of their home. In her heart, she felt safe, loved, protected. What she didn't know was that behind the curtains of luxury and affection, a darker truth had already begun to unravel, one that would soon shake the very foundation of her fairy tale life. At first, Alina thought Raza was just busy. His business had been growing rapidly, and with expansion came pressure. She understood that late-night calls and endless meetings were part of his world. She reminded herself to be patient. He had always provided for her, always shown care. But slowly, the pattern changed from occasional absence to emotional distance. He stopped attending her prenatal appointments, where he once held her hand tightly during scans and asked questions about the baby's growth. Now, he barely looked up from his phone when she brought home the ultrasound images. "Send them to me on WhatsApp," he'd mumble, not bothering to glance. When she asked if he wanted to discuss names for the baby, he replied with a dismissive shrug, later, "Don't overwhelm yourself." It wasn't just neglect, it was the coldness that began to seep into every conversation. He no longer asked how she was feeling. He came home later, and sometimes not at all, claiming business dinners or urgent deals. When Alina tried to express her worry, he'd cut her off sharply. "You're being too sensitive, Alina. It's the hormones talking. Don't stress the baby with your drama." That phrase, "too sensitive," became his shield. He used it to shut her down every time she brought up her emotions. Her attempts to connect were met with sighs, rolled eyes, or silence. Small humiliations began to creep in, subtle at first but increasingly pointed. One morning, when she sat at the breakfast table, eating her usual toast with butter and banana, he looked at her plate and scoffed. "You're really going to eat all that? No wonder your face looks swollen." She froze, the toast halfway to her mouth. Another time, she spent hours dressing up for a dinner he had insisted she attend. She wore a soft blue dress that complemented her pregnancy glow. When she walked out, he looked her up and down and muttered, "That color makes you look pale. Couldn't you try a little harder?" Alina laughed it off then, but it stung. The man who once praised her for everything, her voice, her strength, her grace, now acted as if her presence irritated him, and, worst of all, she had begun to question herself. Was she really too emotional? Too needy? The cracks were quiet, but unmistakable, and she was starting to feel them under her skin. It began with a stray lipstick, mark faint, cherry red, and unmistakably not hers. Alina found it on the collar of Rasa's crisp white shirt while sorting laundry one afternoon. Her heart paused, but she told herself it was probably a smudge from someone else at a crowded event. Maybe a client, maybe a coincidence, but the signs only grew louder. Late-night calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room. A new password on his phone, the scent of unfamiliar perfume lingering on his blazer. She noticed he had started dressing better, grooming more meticulously, and taking weekend business trips that didn't quite add up. He no longer explained where he was going, only that he was busy, and she shouldn't worry about things that weren't her concern. One evening, Alina's world tilted. She had gone into Raza's office to leave his travel charger, and his laptop was open, emails still on the screen. Her eyes landed on a name that kept appearing, Millionaire. Curiosity overpowered her hesitation. One message stood out. Had the best night. Can't wait to feel your arms again. Let's meet after your home duties. Settle down. The blood drained from Alina's face. Her knees weakened, and she sank into the nearest chair, hand instinctively cradling her belly. Her thoughts scattered. How long had this been going on? Who was this woman? And how could Raza betray her like this, especially now? But what hurt even more was what followed. A few days later, at a family dinner at Raza's parents' home, Alina met Millionaire in person. Introduced casually as a family friend, Millionaire was tall, confident, draped in a designer sari, and laughing a little too freely with Raza's brothers. Alina felt the earth shift beneath her. Her instincts screamed the truth. What confirmed it all was the way Raza looked at Millionaire. There was a softness, almost admiration in his gaze, a look Alina hadn't received in months. And when Alina turned to her mother-in-law, hoping to catch some sign of discomfort, she found instead a smile, approval. It hit her like cold water. They knew. His family wasn't just aware, they were complicit in their silence. No one said a word. No one defended her. Alina sat through the evening like a ghost at her own funeral. Her voice drowned beneath the weight of unspoken betrayal. The woman who once felt cherished now felt disposable. Still, she tried to hold on for the baby, for the home they had built, for the future she had envisioned. She placed a hand on her belly and whispered silently, "I'm still here. For you, I won't break." But deep down, something inside her had already begun to change. Alina had spent the entire morning preparing herself emotionally, physically for the baby shower. Rasa's mother had insisted on hosting. It was supposed to be a celebration, a rare gesture from the family to honor her journey into motherhood. The living room of their mansion had been decorated lavishly with pastel balloons, golden ribbons, and a table overflowing with gifts and sweets. Dozens of family members, acquaintances, and social elites were expected to attend. Alina dressed in a soft peach gown that draped gently over her baby bump. She added a delicate pearl necklace her mother had once gifted her and touched up her makeup with a trembling hand. Despite the pain in her heart and the betrayal that gnawed at her soul, she put on a brave face. This day, she reminded herself, was for the baby. But from the moment she stepped into the main hall, she felt the shift. In energy, Raza was already there, surrounded by guests, laughing too loudly, too comfortably. His eyes didn't seek hers, his arms didn't reach out. He greeted her with a formal nod, as if she were just another guest. Her smile faltered, but she held her head high. Then came the moment that changed everything. Halfway through the event, as Alina was cutting the cake, the front doors opened, and in walked Marner dressed in a figure-hugging emerald green gown, her lips curled into a smirk. Gasps rippled through the room. Whispers followed like a growing tide. Alina's heart sank. Marner walked in as though she belonged there, as though this day was hers to invade. She didn't acknowledge Alina. Instead, she made her way directly to Raza. He didn't push her away. He didn't even look surprised. He simply stepped aside, letting her melt into the crowd. Alina stood frozen. The cake cutting resumed with awkward claps and forced laughter. As Alina served slices to guests, Marner approached with a wicked glint in her eye. "Oh, let me help," Marner said sweetly, picking up a slice and moving toward Alina. What happened next felt like slow motion. Marner tripped, and the slice of cake smashed into Alina's chest, smearing down her dress like an insult come to life. A hush fell over the room briefly, then came stifled giggles, a few gasps, and someone even let out a loud, amused laugh. Alina's hands trembled, her breath caught. She turned to Raza, praying for a reaction. He looked away, no outrage, no defense, not even discomfort. Alina stared at him, the weight of public humiliation crushing her chest. She could feel the tears forming, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of falling here. "I'm fine," she whispered, backing away. "Excuse me." Without waiting for anyone's response, she turned and left the hall, clutching the cake-stained fabric of her dress. She ran to the guest room, locked the door behind her, and collapsed into the bed, her sobs muffled by the silence. Her hand instinctively cradled her belly. "I'm so sorry," she cried to her unborn child. "I didn't know it would be like this." But even in her pain, something changed. This wasn't just betrayal, it was war, and Alina, the woman they thought was too soft to fight back, was beginning to awaken. Back home, the silence was deafening. Alina walked into their bedroom like a stranger in her own life. The pastel dress, still stained with cake, clung to her like a cruel reminder. Her feet ached, her back throbbed, but nothing compared to the heaviness in her chest, the weight of humiliation, abandonment, and heartbreak pressing down with relentless force. She didn't turn on the lights. She didn't call anyone. She simply sank to the floor beside the bed, her back pressed against the wall, and let herself unravel. Tears streamed down her face as she replayed the Marner smirk. The cake smeared across her chest, the laughter, Ross's cold silence. Over and over, like a punishment her heart wasn't prepared for, she clutched her belly and whispered, "Why me? What did I do to deserve this?" Her voice broke on the last word. For years, she had given nothing but unwavering, forgiving, hopeful love. She had stood by Raza, supported his dreams, built a home around his needs, and carried his child with grace. And in return, he had stripped her of dignity in front of people who once celebrated her. Now, there was no one left to call. No friend she hadn't already distanced. No family member who wouldn't panic. She felt small, invisible, and worthless. Dark thought crept in. Maybe it would be easier to just leave everything. Disappear. Stop trying. Stop fighting. But then, from the bedside drawer, she heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound coming from the fetal monitor she used to check on the baby each night. She had left it running by accident earlier. She pulled herself up and reached for it, the tiny device glowing faintly in the dark. The sound grew louder in her ears. Thump, thump, thump dash thump. Her baby's heartbeat, steady, strong, alive. Alina froze, listening. The sobs slowed, her breathing steadied. That sound, fragile and powerful, all at once wrapped itself around her like a lifeline. She placed the monitor gently on her belly and closed her eyes. "I'm not alone," she whispered. And just like that, something shifted. A flicker of strength sparked in the hollowed ruins of her heart. It wasn't rage. It wasn't revenge. It was resolve. She wasn't done. Not yet. The next morning, Alina woke up with swollen eyes, but a strangely calm heart. There were no more illusions to protect. No more excuses to make for Raza. The mask had fallen, and now, all that remained was a woman who had been humiliated, betrayed, and broken, but not defeated. She wasn't going to be a victim anymore. While the house still echoed with luxury and silence, Alina began to think clearly for the first time in weeks. She sat at the dressing table, pulled out a notepad, and began writing. It wasn't a diary entry, it was a plan. Step by step, she listed out every important document, her marriage certificate, her medical records, Raza's business filings, shared property deeds, and bank statements. She quietly began making copies, storing them on a USB drive she hid in the lining of her handbag. Late at night, while Raza was either sleeping in the guest room or away with Marnur, she scoured his drawers for passwords, receipts, hidden messages that could be used as proof in court. Each document she found felt like a piece of armor. Every truth she uncovered gave her power. The woman who once doubted her own memory was now building a case that would speak louder than words ever could. But Alina knew she couldn't do it alone. She remembered Zoya, her closest friend from college, now a practicing lawyer in Karachi. They hadn't spoken much in recent years, but she still had her number saved. With shaking hands, Alina typed out a message late one evening. Zoya, I need help. It's serious. Can I trust you? The reply came almost instantly. Always. I'm here. Tell me everything. They set up a call the next day. Alina told her everything carefully, without emotion, just facts. The affair, the cameras, the public humiliation. Zoya listened silently and then said, Alina, I don't just believe you. I see you, and I'm with you, legally, emotionally, every step of the way. That simple promise brought tears to Alina's eyes. Zoya guided her on how to legally document emotional abuse and infidelity. She warned her about Raza possibly moving assets and advised her to begin gathering evidence quietly. Alina followed every instruction with precision, like someone preparing for a silent war. She no longer moved through the house like a ghost. Her silence was no longer weakness. It was strategy. Each breath she took was no longer a struggle, it was purpose. Every time Raza dismissed her or Marnur flaunted her presence, Alina didn't react. She stored it all inside, filing every wound as fuel for the day she would walk out, not just free, but prepared. The fire within her, once dimmed by love and betrayal, now burned steady and bright. Alina wasn't waiting to be rescued anymore. She was becoming her own savior. Alina had learned one of life's hardest lessons, the cruel way. When you have no one to rely on, you must become your own rescue. So, she played the part. Every morning she greeted Raza with a calm smile. She poured his coffee, responded softly when spoken to, and nodded along at his empty explanations for late nights. Marnur's name was never mentioned, and Alina never asked. The silence was strategic, not submissive. To everyone around the house, staff, family visitors, social media followers, they looked like a couple in sync, preparing to welcome their first child into a life of comfort and privilege. But beneath that perfectly curated image, Alina was building her exit quietly, methodically, and without a single misstep. The first thing she did was restart her freelance work. Before marriage, Alina had been a sought-after digital designer with a small but loyal client base. Her creativity, sharp aesthetic sense, and attention to detail had made her a favorite for branding, social media kits, and logo design. She had given it all up when Raza insisted she didn't need to work anymore. You deserve to rest, he'd said, smiling. Now, she realized he simply didn't want her to have independence, but she was taking it back. Late at night, once the house was asleep, Alina turned on her laptop and logged into her old freelance platform accounts. Her fingers, though slightly stiff from months of disuse, remembered the rhythm of creation. She updated her portfolio with mock projects, designed a few templates, and within days, she received her first commission. A startup needed branding for their Instagram. She completed it within hours. The payment came through. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Every rupee earned was carefully saved in a private bank account. Soya had helped her open using her maiden name. She tracked expenses, listed necessary baby items she would need outside of this house, and researched affordable housing options in the city where she could safely raise her child. She even joined an online group for women entrepreneurs, networking quietly, learning about small grants and opportunities. Throughout all this, she didn't allow even a flicker of change to show on her face. She still dressed elegantly, still smiled at Rasa's parents, still posted carefully worded captions on Instagram when prompted. But her heart beat with a new rhythm strategy. Every compliment Rasa offered now felt like a curtain she saw straight through. Every cold glance from Marnur became another reason to keep going. They had underestimated her. They saw her as weak, soft, obedient, but Alina was none of those things anymore. She was patient, she was planning, and most importantly, she was almost ready. Alina wasn't expecting a visitor that afternoon. The sky was overcast, casting a gray light across the sitting room as she quietly folded baby clothes she had secretly purchased with her freelance earnings. The sound of the doorbell startled her. The housekeeper peeked in and said, "Baji, Saad Bayahain." Saad Raza's elder brother had always been cordial, but distant. He was the quiet type, observant, rarely involved in family matters, and often abroad handling international branches of the family business. Alina hadn't seen him in months. She stood, smoothing the folds of her dress, heart pounding. Saad entered the room with a cautious expression, his tall frame wrapped in a gray kurta. There was something different in his eyes, not indifference, but remorse. "Can we talk?" he asked gently. Alina nodded, unsure of what to expect. They sat in silence for a moment before Saad finally spoke. "I've been watching things from a distance, Alina, and I need to say something. I should have stepped in sooner." Alina blinked. "Stepped in? I knew something was off. The way Raza treated you, the way our parents looked, the other way. And when Marnur started showing up at family events," he paused, shame flickering across his face. "I stayed silent. That was a mistake." Alina stared at him, stunned. No one from Raza's family had ever acknowledged the reality. She lived inlet, alone, expressed regret. "I know it's too late for apologies," Saad continued, "but it's not too late to do the right thing. If you ever decide to take action legally, or otherwise, I'll support you. I'll testify if it comes to that." Alina's throat tightened. "Why now?" Saad looked away, jaw clenched. "Because I have a daughter, and if she were in your place, I'd want the world to rise for her." Tears stung Alina's eyes. She hadn't expected kindness from within the very walls that watched her suffer. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaky, but sincere. "That means more than you know." For the first time in a long time, Alina felt a flicker of something unexpected, validation, and she realized she wasn't as alone as she thought. The night before, Alina didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan, slowly turning above her, hand gently resting on her belly. Every breath she took was measured, every thought focused. She had played this moment over in her mind 100 times, planning it, visualizing it, perfecting every step, and now, it was time, at 5 a.m., when the house was still wrapped in silence and sleep. Alina quietly got out of bed. She slipped into comfortable shoes, tied her dupatta tightly, and wheeled out the small suitcase she had packed days earlier. Inside it were only the essentials: 2 sets of clothes, baby supplies, important documents, her USB drive, and the little savings she had managed to collect. On the dresser, She left a sealed envelope addressed to Raza. It contained a handwritten note short.com and deliberate. This isn't revenge. It's survival. I deserve to be safe. I deserve to be respected. By the time you read this, I'll be somewhere you can't reach. Legal notice enclosed. All communication will go through my lawyer. Underneath the note was the official legal notice Zoya had drafted, informing Raza of Alina's decision to separate, her right to custody, and a clear warning to not attempt contact outside legal channels. She took one last look around the bedroom, the cold luxury, the photos that no longer meant anything, the walls that had once promised love but delivered silence. It wasn't home anymore. Stepping out, she walked through the quiet hallway, past the closed doors of her in-laws, past the grand staircase. She used to descend in heels and make up for dinner parties she never enjoyed. Her heart pounded, but her grip on the suitcase was steady. Outside, a discreet cab waited at the corner. It was all arranged by Zoya V. Detail, a safe, confidential apartment at a women's shelter that partnered with legal advocacy groups. A place where Alina could rest, rebuild, and prepare for the arrival of her child in peace. She slid into the back seat, pulled the shawl over her head, and whispered to herself, "We're free now." And as the car pulled away, Alina didn't look back. Not once. Alina never imagined that rock bottom would become the foundation of her new life. 3 months after her quiet escape, she stood in a modest but sunlit hospital room, holding her newborn daughter in trembling arms. The nurse had just handed her over wrapped in a pale pink blanket, eyes closed, lips pursed into a perfect pout. Amal, Alina whispered, naming her child after the Arabic word for hope. It wasn't just a name, it was a promise. Tears welled in Alina's eyes, not from pain, but from gratitude. The journey had been harrowing weeks of legal back and forth, emotional turmoil, physical exhaustion, but in this moment, everything made sense. Amal's heartbeat was the rhythm that had carried her through betrayal, fear, and humiliation. Her soft cries were the sound of Alina's own rebirth, while the world thought she had disappeared. Alina had been quietly rebuilding with help. She had found temporary housing through a women's empowerment shelter. There, she met other survivors, teachers, homemakers, businesswomen, each with her own war story. They listened to Alina's pain without judgment and, more importantly, reminded her she wasn't alone. Inspired by these women and driven by her own experiences, Alina began sketching ideas again, this time, not for clients, but for herself. Her first concept was simple: a self-care kit for expectant mothers, gentle creams, stress relief oils, herbal teas, and affirmation cards with messages like "Your body is sacred and you are more than their opinion." She called it Nura Light from Within, using her savings and design skills. She built the brand from scratch, designed the packaging, created the website, and started social media pages. At first, orders trickled in from friends and former clients, but word spread. Zoya introduced her to other lawyers who wanted gift sets for their clients' women in shelters, hospitals, or rebuilding their lives, just like Alina had. Soon, Nura wasn't just a business, it was a movement. Every box sold carried a message of resilience. Every package delivered reminded another woman that she wasn't alone, that pain could be turned into purpose. And every time Alina wrote a thank you note to a customer, she included Amel's tiny handprint, a symbol of how something born in heartbreak could become the source of infinite light. One evening, as she nursed Amal and packed orders late into the night, Alina caught her reflection in the window. She didn't see the woman who had once been humiliated at a baby shower. She didn't see the pregnant wife who had been mocked and ignored. She saw a fighter, a founder, a mother. She saw power. It started with a tweet. A customer had shared a photo of her Nura self-care box with a caption, designed by a woman who turned heartbreak into healing. Every item inside feels like a hug. Within hours, the post went viral. Bloggers, influencers, and women's groups began sharing Alina's story how a pregnant wife, humiliated and abandoned, had rebuilt her life with nothing but courage, creativity, and a newborn in her arms. The narrative struck a chord. Messages poured in from across Pakistan, beyond from women who had faced abuse, betrayal, or abandonment. You gave me hope. Your strength made me believe I can start again. You're the reason I filed for divorce. What began as a side project now had a wait list. News outlets requested interviews. Talk shows invited her on air. But Alina, still protective of her peace, chose only one. A quiet podcast hosted by a woman who had also left a toxic marriage. There, in a calm, honest voice, Alina told her story, not to shame, not to expose, but to empower. Raza, watching from afar, didn't like what he saw. His phone buzzed endlessly. Investors questioned his character. Clients pulled out of contracts. News headlines hinted at a toxic home life scandal surrounding his brand. His once perfect public image began to crack. And Marnoor, she vanished, deleted her social media, cut off contact. Some said she moved abroad. Others claimed she'd been paid off to stay silent. But Alina didn't care enough to find out. That chapter was closed. Raza tried to reach out, calls, emails, even sending flowers to her office. Alina didn't respond to a single one. Instead, she kept growing. Nira now partnering with women's shelters and maternity clinics to distribute free care kits to women in crisis. Her success wasn't just financial, it was emotional, spiritual. She had taken the ugliest part of her life and turned it into something beautiful. Something that helped others heal too. One evening, as she sat rocking Amal to sleep, a notification lit up her phone. It was an article headline, "From Abused to Empowered, the woman who rose above the noise." Alina smiled softly. She didn't just rise, she soared. The conference hall glowed under soft golden lights, filled with hundreds of women founders, dreamers, survivors. The air buzzed with excitement, curiosity, and something deeper, solidarity. Alina stood backstage, a wireless mic clipped to her. Sorry. She looked radiant, not just in appearance, but in the quiet confidence that radiated from within. Amal, now almost 1 year old, was backstage in a playpen with Zoya, gurgling happily. As the host introduced her, a roar of applause echoed. Alina walked onto the stage with steady steps and a gentle smile. A large screen behind her displayed the Nura logo, now a symbol of empowerment across the country. She paused at the podium, looked out at the sea of faces, some teary-eyed, some beaming with admiration, and then she began. "A year ago, I was in a hospital room, holding my newborn with trembling hands. I had no job, no home of my own, and no idea what came next. 2 years ago, I was being laughed at, publicly humiliated, abandoned while pregnant. I was told I was too sensitive, too emotional, too weak. But the truth is I wasn't weak. I was carrying both life and silence, and I broke through both." A hush fell over the room. "I wasn't born into power or money. I was raised with values, kindness, loyalty, love. I thought those things were enough, until I learned the hard way that not everyone respects them. I was betrayed, not just by a husband, but by a system that expected me to stay silent, to endure. But I made a choice, to rise." Flashbacks played behind her. Alina, folding baby clothes alone, weeping in the hospital, sketching branding ideas, in a shelter bedroom, receiving her first online order, holding Amal up to the light, with tears of joy in her eyes. "They mocked me when I was down, but I stood back up. For myself, and for every woman who's ever been pushed down and told to stay quiet." Applause broke out, slow at first, then rising, wave after wave. Some women stood, hands clapping above their heads, tears streaming. Alina blinked away emotion. "Today, I run a business that ships across 3 countries. I employ other survivors. We're in talks with hospitals and government programs, but the greatest achievement I have is peace. A life free of fear. A daughter growing up watching her mother fight for her worth. She stepped back from the... Mike smiled and nodded as she walked off stage. The crowd rose in a standing ovation. Backstage, Amal reached out to her with a giggle, arms open. Alina scooped her daughter into her arms, kissing her forehead. "We did it," she whispered. Somewhere, deep inside her chest, the wounds had finally turned to wisdom, and the woman who had once cried in silence now stood in power.